Hi everyone, this is a lecture for Chapter 7 for Interpersonal Communication for our hybrid class. This chapter is on gender communication. Please make sure that you have completed your journal before you watch this lecture to assist in being aware of the terminology that I will be using throughout the lecture. Once I have completed this, then I recommend taking the time to look at project number 1, which will be the first project we will be doing in this class. So gender communication, the very first thing that is important to talk about is what makes a gender. So there are two main schools of thought. Some believe nature makes up what gender you identify with. Some believe nurture makes up what gender you identify with. Before we even get into that debate, it is important that we talk about what is meant by gender. So gender does not mean what is your biological makeup, what genitalia do you have. Instead, when we're talking about gender identity, it is what identity do you as a person most identify with? Do you more identify as a man or do you more identify as a woman? However, there's a school of thought which has a lot of credence that says nature plays a major role in determining whether or not you identify as a boy or a girl. So there is biology, there is biological makeup, but I personally believe the stronger influence when we're talking about nature is in hormones. So with a lot of people who identify as the gender opposite of what they are born with, there's usually still a hormone or neurological distinction that makes them identify with the gender that they identify with. There is something going on either neurologically or with hormones that assist in helping explain why some people with boy parts consider themselves to be a girl. So that crossing the gender from the one you are and identifying with the gender that you are not born with does a lot of times have an aspect of nature involved in it. But then how I look at how one expresses their gender, how you express being a male or express being a female, is through nurture. So it's your upbringing, being given dolls if you're a girl, be giving trucks if you're a boy, being dressed in dresses as a girl, being dressed in blue as a boy. There are a lot of things along those lines that are 100% nurture driven. You are taught by society, by your friends, by your family, what it means to be a boy and to do boy things, and what it means to be a girl and to do girl things. So while I personally believe that nature dictates what gender you identify with, I also fully believe that nurture is how it dictates how you express the gender you identify with. So this leads us into how can people cross that gender divide in a way that will allow you to be able to understand as much what the opposite gender thinks or is feeling about a situation. Which brings me to one of the most important concepts in this entire class. If there's one thing you get from this class, I hope it is the opaque rule. So a lot of us have heard of the golden rule, which is do unto others as you would have them do unto you, or treat others the way you want to be treated. And that is a great place to start in trying to understand how to treat other people and how to be a nice, good person. However, there's a problem with that philosophy. There's a problem with the golden rule, treat others the way you want to be treated. And in the problem with that is then the assumption is made that other people want to be treated the way you would treat yourself. So the idea that if you want people to be a good audience member, you should be a good audience member for them is great. But as soon as you say this person is sad, and when I'm sad, I like to be given a hug, and you go and give them a hug because that's what you would want, but they don't like getting hugs, now all of a sudden you've created a tense, possibly conflict situation. And so instead, this book preaches the idea of the opaque rule, which is do unto others as they would do unto themselves. So instead of saying, I know how I would want to be cheered up, so that's how I'm going to try to cheer up this person. You instead ask this person, what can I do to cheer you up or to make you feel better or to help out in this moment? And as soon as you ask them what they want and you give that to them instead of assuming what they want because it's what you would want, you are now applying the opaque rule instead of applying the golden rule. So there are 3 major steps to applying the opaque rule. The first thing is to be aware. So be aware of your surroundings, be aware of what you see or notice other people going through. Then the second step is to be empathetic. And so in this moment, I want to take a second and make sure that we are really, really clear on the difference between empathy and sympathy. A lot of us are really, really good at being sympathetic, but what we need to do is be empathetic. So sympathy is I know what you're going through, you put yourself in that person's shoes, you tell them that you feel sorry for them, but the problem with sympathy is as soon as you put yourself in somebody else's shoes, you are still grounding the situation in your own experiences in the way you would handle it if you were them. And as soon as you do that, you start making assumptions because, again, you approach the situation the way you would handle the situation if you were going through what they were going through. And that's problematic because just because that's how you would go through the situation, it doesn't mean that that's how they would go through the situation. So instead, we need to be empathetic. So empathy is where you are supportive and understanding of that person's right to be experiencing what they're experiencing, to be going through what they are going through, and not try to relate to it, but instead support them with what they are doing. So the extreme example I use is if somebody was to come up to you, tears streaming down their face because they stepped on an ant and killed it. You might be thinking to yourself, seriously, this is what they're going to cry about? Or I burned those things with a magnifying glass, but she's upset because she stepped on one? And as soon as you start trying to be sympathetic, so, it's not that big of a deal, it's just an ant. Or as soon as you start, going, why are you so upset? It's just a stupid ant. Or as soon as you start judging them by saying, really, an ant? You are not giving credence to their emotions or giving them the space to be able to exist in what they are experiencing. So instead, in that moment, if you checked your own viewpoints and stopped trying to put yourself in their shoes and instead just let them be in that moment, let them be there experiencing what they're experiencing, being supportive. So asking them how they felt about this and what can you do to help them through this or things along those lines. You are now making it about them and their experiences and what they are going through, which is going to help them to process it and to be able to move on from the situation. But as soon as you enter sympathy, now all of a sudden it's no longer just about them, it's about you and them, and that's not what a lot of people need in that situation. So that's why empathy is so important to practice instead of sympathy, but it is hard to do because we want to relate. We want them to feel better. So step 1, be aware. Step 2, be empathetic. And then most importantly, number 3, clearly explain your understandings. So instead of assuming that this person is crying because they failed a test that was just handed back, because the tests were just handed back and she starts crying, instead explain what you're seeing and ask her if there's anything you can do to help. And by doing that, in that moment, you are going to apply the opaque rule and you are helping them by treating them the way they want to be treated, not the way you want to be treated, which is going to make sure that their needs are being met and whatever the situation is happening, they are feeling valued and respected instead of judged or dismissed. Now this takes us to quick tips for men. So before we get into this, whenever we're talking about gender communication or gender in general, I want to stress that these are tips or we're talking about most men or most women. So even if we don't say most, I want to make sure we understand that the most is implied. So these quick tips for men, these are great tips that are going to help men communicate better with most women. Not all women, but most women, and vice versa. These rules, some of them are really hard to follow, or you might disagree with them, but that's the whole point. If you disagree with them, it's probably because it's something that you do, and I want you to think about how effective you are when you do it. So the first quick tip for men, is to reassure her often that you care about her. So that is because a lot of times women either feel taken advantage of because they cook and they clean and they do the dishes and they do the laundry, and you just take it for granted that you're going to have clean underwear. Instead, if you were to occasionally thank her for the things that she's doing, it makes her feel valued or important. More important than that, women can tend to start questioning relationships or questioning whether or not you still are invested in the relationship if you don't from time to time remind her that you care about her, that you love her, that you are part of this relationship, and that you want it to be successful, and that she's the only one for you. If women don't hear that, a lot of times they start to wonder if that is no longer the case. The next one is one that is super important, and I wish more men did it, my husband included, and that is show her you're listening. So I get that it's really easy to multitask, but when women are talking about something, especially something important, we really like having your undivided attention, so that way we know that you are receiving the messages that we are sending. Even if you are while multitasking on the computer or watching TV or doing a chore, whenever you give us your undivided attention, it makes us feel valued and special. The next one is remember that men and women keep score differently. So that means that what you value as important may not be something we value as important, and vice versa. There are going to be things that we are going to be able to forgive more easily than you are, and we have to remember that there's a difference there. So just because something's important to you doesn't mean it's important to a woman. Then lastly, remember that shopping is a social occasion. Not all women love shopping, but the reason why women tend to go shopping and stay out for longer is because we use that time to chat with our friends and catch up on what's going on. So while you might go into the store, get the one thing you need, and leave again, women tend to wander more because we also use it as a social occasion more than just shopping to get what we need. So this takes us to quick tips for women. So women, number one, which is something we struggle with, is that men want us to be direct. Ladies, we need to stop with our passive aggression. Instead of saying, oh, I guess I'll take your bowl to the sink, instead tell them, will you please take your bowl and put it in the sink? If we are more direct, because men are bad with hints, most men struggle to understand hints. So if you're more direct with them, it's going to make sure that what you are asking of them is going to get accomplished and that they're going to understand what you want. Number two, don't hover. So what that is men, if they're working on a project or if they're thinking something through or just in general, they don't want you always there, always talking to them, always wanting to know. Sometimes they need space to think things through or to work things through on their own. So women, try not to hover. Number three, which is the hardest one for me personally, is he said what he meant. The reason why that's a hard tip for me to remember is because women often don't say what we mean. So we assume the golden rule. If we allude to things, we assume men allude to things. And so I think if we just understood, if we ask our significant other, how do I look in this dress? And they say we look fine, then we really do look fine. It's not the fact that he didn't say great or that he didn't say good doesn't mean that we don't look great or good. He just used the word fine. And so instead of challenging that, we need to start accepting it when they say the things that they say and not think that they're hiding things or not think that they're not telling us what they really think. But instead, he said what he meant. Next one, ladies, looking is just that. And so what we mean by that is a lot of times men will notice other women, but that doesn't mean that they don't care about us or love us. And so if that's something you struggle with, when you catch your guy looking at another girl and you struggle with that, I want you to evaluate yourself and see if there's a self-concept or a self-esteem issue that you have that makes you worried that your man doesn't care about you. And I think that that's more important to be addressed than just looking is just that. And then lastly, never give a man advice. So a lot of times when we try to give advice to men, they will have already thought about it and already dismissed it, which is why that won't work for them. So I'm almost out of time here, so I'm going to do another very small video to follow up this one to close out the chapter. So look for that after this one.